Welcome everyone to the penultimate session of the series that we're running as part of Techweek in New Zealand, along with the Singapore FinTech Festival, Reimagine the Digital Economy. And what a great few sessions that we've had since yesterday. We talked about digital economy, digital trade. We referenced the landmark DIPA deal between Singapore and New Zealand. Earlier in the morning, we talked about the role of technology in food assurance. And covered topics such as sustainability in that. And now this is the penultimate session focused on green and sustainable fintech. And this is part of the SFF primer. You know, most of the audience joining in, whether you're joining in from Asia or from New Zealand, would be aware of the Singapore FinTech Festival, the world's largest fintech platform. Ironically, not run by an events business, run by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and a great platform to drive innovation, proof of concepts, collaboration, as well as capital raising. So it's a privilege to be part of to be a part of that and to bring that to New Zealand as part of Techweek New Zealand. And this is the second year we've done this. Last year we ran this session in person in Wellington, which is really well attended. So I'm very pleased to continue that on. And we've got a great set of speakers, very relevant theme in today's context: green and sustainable fintech. We'll also be touching on tech for good, because that's a very key aspect. And as I introduce one of the speakers, who most of you might be familiar with, Swapnendu Mohanty. He said yesterday in the session, he referenced digital empathy. And I think that's, it's a great theme to have, because it will reshape how we look at the world going forward. So I'm really excited. We have a great lineup. So if I sort of go to the next slide in terms of our speakers, we've got Anand Ranchor, who's the head of innovation for Kiwibank. Great representation there for New Zealand's financial services community. Kiwibank, it's got the name, it's got the name in it. It represents New Zealand and the ethos. It's also green. It's got a green logo, so that works very well for us. And of course, we've got Dave Rouse, who's the CEO of Carbon Click, who've been making some very, some very strong plays around creating more sustainable options for consumers to choose from. And then we've got Dheeraj Chaudhary joining in from Singapore. Dheeraj is a long-term financial services and fintech veteran, former CEO of one of the digital bank applicants in Singapore. Dheeraj is also a principal advisor covering fintech with us at Ecosystem. We've got James Brown, who runs the fintech ecosystem in New Zealand, runs FinTech New Zealand as part of NZ Tech. They're a big part of Techweek. And of course, really pleased to have Liana Cohen-Hardy. I had the opportunity to speak with her a few weeks ago, and I was really impressed with what she's trying to do with Finapster, an app that allows consumers to make the right sort of choices based on sustainable ratings of brands. And then, of course, most importantly, we've got the man of the hour, who's exceptionally well known in the fintech community globally, achieves a lot of things in whatever he does. He drives the fintech community, he drives the commercial interests in this ecosystem, not just in Singapore, but globally, but always very impressed to see how Swapnendu brings in a whole bunch of initiatives that actually support the wider community in different parts of the world. And that whole theme of tech for good, inclusion, sustainability always form a part of his agenda. So I'm really looking forward to the sessions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anand Ranchor to kick it off with his session and the perspective from Kiwibank and what we are seeing from New Zealand with respect to sustainable finance and all the things that we want to discuss around inclusion and so on. So Anand, over to you.
Great, thanks, Amit. All right. Look, it feels very topical, as Amit said, to be speaking about sustainability and green fintech right now. 2020 is shaping up as a tipping point given the shifts that have taken place globally this year. Greta Thunberg and the coming of age of consumer and business alignment on climate change, and of course COVID, creating a push to digital and broader implications for the economy around inclusion and so much more. So welcome everybody, and really interested to, great to be presenting and talking to you today. Let me just introduce myself before I begin. I'm Arnon Rantoul. I lead innovation at Kiwibank, covering future horizons, corporate strategy and new ventures. I oversee New Zealand's leading fintech accelerator, KFA, and I sit on the board of FinTech NZ and NZ Tech. So that provides a unique perspective across developments, both at the enterprise level and also across the fintech ecosystem. And while I've never really thought of myself as a banker, it's getting harder to deny having spent 20 years in banking. In fact, you could say my banking experience started much younger in life, having started a loan book lending to family and kids on the train at school in my early years. Unfortunately, I don't have the bank book that I wrote those lines up now, but it looked a lot like this one here on the screen. Throughout my career, I've really been a problem solver, working across a range of different roles, but being good at reframing the problem at hand to come up with new rules and new ways to think about the solution. And I think this is at the heart of addressing the big issues in sustainability. I just want to share a little bit about Kiwibank to give you some context for them, for the stories that I'm going to share. And I always like to start with our purpose. And for Kiwibank, our purpose is Kiwis making Kiwis better off. While we have a fully commercial charter, we were founded nearly 20 years ago to challenge the industry and stand up for New Zealanders. Initially focused on reducing the economic rent levied by the big four Australian banks that dominate this market, we now take a broader view of what it means to positively shape the future of New Zealand, to have an aspiration for Kiwis and for Kiwi businesses. And having long-term shareholders is a huge advantage for us to take this long-term approach, given that they want to see success over a 25-year or more horizon. It also negates the effects of short-termism, which is at the heart of many of the sustainability challenges that we face today. We also have a proud history of innovation and digital, leading many of the market shifts, both across New Zealand and at a global scale. This includes in areas of digital sales. We're one of the first banks to launch in mobile, and also more recently with the removal of cheques from New Zealand. So let's take us, where are we today in terms of sustainability? You don't have to look very far to see the big problems at every corner, be it climate change, inequality, pollution of our waterways, and inclusion at so many levels. And consumers, citizens, and businesses are recognizing things needs to change. So there's hope and there's opportunity. I want to take you through a brief look at how we're approaching the issue of sustainability at Kiwibank. First, I want to say it's still early days and we don't have all or even many of the answers yet. But we've made a start, and these are a few of the examples of what we're doing across the spectrum to address sustainability. First is investing in building the financial capability of our youth. We're working with the Department of Conservation to protect our wildlife, noting that land and nature has a particular significance to Kiwis. Digital inclusion. There's an example here of our Dora bus, digital on-road access, that's taking digital learning to seniors. The conversations often start with how to connect to Wi-Fi and getting on the internet, let alone getting to questions and conversations around online banking. And there's many other things that we do in the sustainability space. And we take this broad view, all stemming from our purpose about how we're making Kiwis better off, and what are the core issues facing Kiwis and New Zealand as a nation. And you might say, well, what does this have to do with fintech? And so just hold on for a moment, because I'll bring that linkage in. But we think about this and we take a three-step approach. The first of those is do no harm. The next one's navigate the shifts. And then thirdly, we're looking to amplify the good. When we think about do no harm, this is about defining what matters to us and identifying those things that don't align with our aspiration for New Zealand. What are those things that don't align with our values? And we've recently started to make a stand about certain sectors that we will no longer bank. These include fossil fuels, tobacco, arms, amongst others, that we want to exit and that our business bank will no longer trade with. We also And we also see examples of this in our investment arm, and also consumer applications like Liana's Finapster that I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure that you'll hear more of later this evening in the panel discussion. Navigating the shifts is about recognising the secondary effects of the issues and actions arising from sustainability. An example of this is what issues arise as reporting requirements force companies to declare their risk from climate change. And how does that reprice certain markets and assets, and what are the consequences of that? And the third stage that we look at is amplifying for good. This is where things get exciting. Given the scale of the sustainability challenges we're facing, how can we use our role in society to extend the influence and impact that we can have, working with others to create a bigger impact than we can have on our own? How can we drive change the way in the way that we do business through our supply chain, for our customers, and for generations to come? And this is then where I think FinTech has a key role to play. Across these three areas, the development and the access of data and standards needed to identify and measure ESG activities is critical. Today, we see that this is extremely inconsistent, and the inability to measure these is a key hindrance to moving some of these issues forward. To develop new propositions that drive behaviour change, and to develop applications that surface and manage risk, the opportunities go on for FinTech. I want to take you through a few examples of these, both from Kiwibank and from the local FinTech ecosystem. So first, let's have a look at an example around navigating shifts around climate change. As a lender and an insurer, we are critically aware of the risk from sea level rising. New Zealand, as a small island nation, has a key exposure to coastal flooding. But consider this: when does the impact hit? It's not when the water hits the front door. It's when the market prices the risk and properties are revalued, and that's when the effect hits. And of course, this has major implications for us as a bank and an insurer in terms of the property portfolio, but it equally has a large impact for Kiwis and Kiwi businesses with coastal property, seeing what is, for most, their largest asset being significantly devalued. So these are critical questions for us to sort of to face into. And so we're partnering to build a geospatial model that helps us understand and predict the risk. It goes down to a very unit level so that we can see on a per property basis what the level of that risk is against in terms of different scenarios for sea level rising, and understand when that is so that we can work back and sort of work through not only understanding the risk on our portfolio across the loan book and across the insurance business, but also then to understand how we engage in that conversation with customers. You know, as soon as that risk starts getting repriced and one player does it, it has an effect at a market level. So actually understanding how we sort of step into that conversation and the timing of that is really critical. The next example I want to draw your attention to is an example of amplifying for good. And this is a shout out to Dave, who's on the panel discussion, and his business coming. Sorry, this is Kogo first, connecting good. And Kogo empowers consumers to drive change through their spend and how it works. The way it works is customers get to choose what matters to them, whether that be climate change, organic, or any other sort of key issues. And they can see that merchants that align to those and what activities and actions that those merchants are doing in those different fields. You can link your bank account, and so you can see how, as a user, your spend aligns with your own values over time. And cumulatively, you can see both what impact you're having and actually how you spend and the decisions that you make with your wallet actually align with your value system. Merchants get the benefit of the insights into what matters to their customers, and that drives changes in what they can do to then align their offerings to what matters to their customers. And some of the impacts that Kogo have achieved to date already include moving merchants to the living wage, moving supermarkets to EVs for their delivery vans. And so you can see that you're already starting to create this flywheel of change and really putting power into the consumer's hands. And so really excited to see opportunities like this develop. And this is operating in New Zealand, it's operating in the UK, and I know the team have got plans to take that further. The second example I want to draw attention to is one that we're doing around building financial capability in our next generation of Kiwis. And how this one works is it's a combination of lessons delivered in the classroom and a simulated economy so that kids get practical hands-on experience playing the role of using money in everyday life. That could be buying property, paying rent, paying wages, earning income, and they do this all by learning by doing. And the program makes it easy for the teachers and the kids alike. And the program services kids all the way from primary school all the way through to high school, and it's all digitally delivered. And so we've been really excited to be working with Banker for a number of years now and getting that out to as many schools as we can. And then the last example I want to share too, and sorry, this is the one that I was trying to say, this is Dave's business, is Carbon Click. And this is really exciting. It's about empowering consumers to drive change by providing consumers the option to offset their carbon footprint every time they shop. And the way this one works is consumers see options to offset their purchase in the shopping cart. They have full traceability of the offset program, and Carbon Click ensure that the offsets are of a quality standard certified to ensure the integrity of the program. Merchants have a simple integration, and Shopify is one of those. And there's also other options for banks and issuers to link through for APIs. So there's lots of different ways that can be taken to market. But again, it's a great example of putting power in the consumer's hands and driving that change. Some final thoughts that I wanted to share with you is we all have the opportunity to make an impact on sustainability issues. And defining your values and acting accordingly is key. Look beyond the direct impacts. Given we're in financial services, much of our business is about risk management, pricing of assets and pricing of risk, all of which are impacted by sustainability issues. And the impacts are not just for operations and shareholders, but also for our customers and our communities, and significant impacts at that. Understanding these risks requires good access to good data with big gaps existing today. And I think this presents a great opportunity for fintechs. Fintechs also have a key role to play in enabling and facilitating behavioural change, just like we've seen with Kogo and Carbon Click, and also from Napster, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. So look, that covers it from me. I just want to do a sort of a light touch on what some of the exciting things that are happening both in New Zealand here at Kiwibank and across the fintech ecosystem. And with that, I'm just going to hand over to Sol.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. So thanks, Anand, putting together a very comprehensive view on the green finance in particular. What I think New Zealand has been a market leader in this space, and I think embedding the tech part is a natural progression for New Zealand to build a strong expertise in that space. And that should be your core strength because every market is aspiring to build a certain unique capability. And in my view, New Zealand is a place where a lot of green fintech will emerge because there's a lot of work has been done much ahead of others in this space. So I genuinely believe that's a space I hope the New Zealand fintech ecosystem do build on and be the global center for a lot of this thinking around this space. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift some of this discussion and dialogue to a tech for good and sustainability piece. And I'm going to anchor some of the market reality around digital finance. And the reason I'm calling it market reality is before the crisis, we thought that the digital finance has really graduated and it has gone to a more mainstream way of doing things. But to my disappointment and to my surprise, I think it was a bit of an echo chamber where people who are indulging in digital finance were talking to each other and getting very happy that we have arrived. Largely because right in the crisis, things did fall apart because most of us were in a lockdown state. We had to rely on digital infrastructure. And there are many examples where the promise of a remarkable digital experience didn't really work. It started with the inability of e-commerce sites to really make a to me, the whole bot is an useless piece of device, the chatbots, which is completely meaningless. And I found them completely meaningless right to the crisis because they really didn't serve anything. And the whole, the SMEs and the businesses which required to rely on a lot of cross-border payments did struggle a lot, because when the trade shifts from a physical connectivity to a digital connectivity, there are many things which suddenly seems to be more difficult than ever. But many markets, not also, few markets rather, who had somehow built a strong national digital infrastructure, the domestic problem was not a problem because they could quickly shift. I think Singapore had a big advantage here because last 4 to 5 years, we have been putting a lot of effort in building the digital rails, be it payment infrastructure, data infrastructure, national ID as a way of doing things. As the crisis came in, people could shift. The electronic payments went through the roof. The small businesses were able to use the digital rails to do their business, and anybody who could operate their businesses out of home, they could quickly migrate. Of course, we had to put together a lot of schemes and support so that people are also able to buy the digital tools as a part of their construct as they reconfigure themselves to address this changing norm during COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. I believe that should be the way of doing things normally. But the piece which I think I want to share today and worries me a lot, in fact, it is a problem globally, is the sustainability piece. When I say sustainability is not in the lens of green finance, sustainability of our own social, economic challenges, because the financial service, which are supposed to be more inclusive or getting inclusive, didn't really make the mark. Many countries, large cities, saw a reverse migration of casual workers or gig workers. They couldn't stay in large cities for more than a month or less than a few weeks because they didn't have access to any savings account. They didn't have access to a planned pension, micro pension structure. So they had no financial product which could respond to them during the crisis where they were not getting paid. And having an unsustainable financial product around yourself made these migrant workers to shift the cities to back to the villages. And there are many heartbreaking stories which talks about how challenging was those people who had to leave in spite of spending 20, 30 years in those large cities working day and night. They had no financial product to dip into during the crisis. To me, it is the first sign of a significant breakage in the financial inclusion agenda. We did not build a financial system which sustains these people during crisis. Same thing happened for the businesses. They were having access to a lot of finance through fintech lenders, but during the crisis, the investors stayed back. A lot of investors, and if you think about the P2P lenders, their prime focus was to serve the unmet need of many of this demand in the segment where banks don't engage, but they also stepped out. So which means during crisis, you will see a reverse impact of the intention of the P2P lenders who are supposed to serve this community will get challenged, and in an irony, they will also step out. So you leave a large set of people who will having a financial access crisis, be it a savings product or a pension structure or some kind of access to credit during the crisis. So I think what that leaves us to think about, do we have to shift or think more deeper in building a financial system which is inclusive and also sustainable during crisis? I think that's the key shift we have to start thinking. And there has to be at a macro level a shift from productivity and efficiency to sustainability and resiliency. And the underlying shift should be embedded with a lot of thinking around climate change, green product, where the sustainability and resiliency becomes part of the new supply chain. And I think that I personally believe, and I think a lot of people do express in this view, that the hyper-localization, high concentration of supply chain from highly efficient center of excellence or production is going to be disturbed. So there'll be a far more distributed localization of distributed goods and services. So you will see technology coming and spreading out and building a far more distributed and connected supply chain. And hopefully, because of the shift, now is the time to build the new distributed method in a more sustainable and climate friendly way, so that we don't go back and build a new set of supply chain connectivity where the source of the goods and services are still the same, which is not necessarily the most climate friendly and the most climate green driven. So we have an opportunity to take advantage of the shift from hyper-localization to distributed way of moving goods and services from different parts of the economy rather than one big center. So that's the opportunity for us to look at. And the third angle is we got to go back to basics. If we truly want to build a highly connected and infrastructure which will sustain the future crisis, we got to start thinking deeply about our own digital rails. Countries have spoken about it, but they're not invested on building the digital rails. The national ID discussion has been there for more than now 10 years. If you start the history of success from India's Aadhaar stack and national stack, India stack, and Singapore's own national stack from SingPass to MyInfo, there are few countries who have actually built a complete comprehensive stack for their own digital rails. And if you want to really move a new construct for businesses to run in a digitally sustainable way, the rails have to be built. There is no escape from that. I think policymakers have to put their mind together to get it done. I think that's a non-negotiable contract for getting things getting things done in a much more sustainable way in the frame of digital economy. And the third and the sub point to that whole digital infrastructure is how do we connect the rails? It's no point Singapore putting together a remarkable stack. It's no point India putting a remarkable India stack if they're not talking to each other. It's a pity, it's a shame that such stacks are not talking to each other. There's no real connectivity happening between the two stacks wherever they're being built, or three stacks. I think there's a time for us to connect these rails so that anything we build on top of it is not going to be broken or piecemeal, or during crisis this just seems not to work. So the need to interoperate, connect these rails has become far more important now, and we got to think thoughtfully about it so that we get it right now, and hopefully the next crisis will not be that painful. Now, a little on the green side, means we know that there are a lot of stats out there. My favorite stat has been what DBS published a few months back, that today the demand for green finance investment is somewhere close to $200 billion a year, and today the market capacity or what market is actually doing is around $40 billion. So there's a huge gap between what the market needs versus what market is being given. And even if you get that $40 billion out, there are two or three fundamental gap in digital finance. To me, these are primarily tech driven. One is, once I do a project or fund a project using the principles of digital finance, the ESG principles, how do I ensure that these projects are actually complying to the digital the green commitment they have made? Because these are long-term infrastructure investment. So we need a lot of green tech which will go into that space to monitor projects green KPIs during the life cycle of this project. So how do you build infrastructure, IoT devices, third-party services which will build that necessary monitor and measure capacity for the markets, so that we can increase the green finance size, because that infrastructure will immediately push the green finance capacity, because now we have an infrastructure to monitor and measure post financing all these projects to ensure that the green KPIs are maintained and delivered. Further downstream, and this is where I'm going to be a little more controversial, that I strongly believe because of the sensitivity of green finance and the climate change response, there has to be an alternate way to collect data. And my bold and rather a little bit of a controversial thinking, why can't we explore a citizen empowered data collection? And let me explain a bit here. Uh, Today, we rely on third-party sources to collect data and say, oh, but this project is really delivering to the green KPI, no worries. How about that every citizen around that project has a little device and they can transmit real-time on cloud a citizen captured data set, which means whenever you do something in that area, or whenever you finance projects and products which will go in building some capacities, some factories or some infrastructure, and they're supposed to adhere to green standards, there'll be citizens who are staying near that asset where the asset is getting created, should have some kind of independent device on the mobile phone to transmit all the climate impact data. And that should be an independent data source which can give a true a credibility that this infrastructure being developed in this market, in this space, are not affecting the green environment which they're supposed to adhere to. A good example of that in my mind is what's happening in Japan. In Japan, they have an organization which does independent citizen empowered data monitoring for nuclear radiation. It happened during Fukushima. There was a movement, the citizen movement, to start carrying devices which can monitor data independently, and the data is sent to cloud, and you can actually go there into the site and see the whole map of Japan, where it shows there are 3 or 4 data sets which shows citizens like you and me are transmitting data with a little device attached to a home or to a bicycle or to a car, real time, how the climate data are looking. And that's an independent source of data. And that becomes a key enabler to this whole green agenda. A citizen empowered, a citizen driven, or a citizen science, which creates data set which can be used to solidify and strengthen this whole green tech and green monitoring agenda. And you guys, I mean, you can always go and see that site in Japan, in Fukushima, how they created this data. So just to summarize, I think the green agenda is now a real agenda. Now every banks, every regulators are putting policies, standards, mechanism to ensure that there is a certain commitment and a gradual commitment to more and more green investment. MAS has many policies out there. Every jurisdiction putting policy framework, policy stands, standards, taxonomy out there. What we as a fintech or a tech community, our responsibility is to start building the tech capacity for this green finance. I think collectively we have to start building those tools, services, especially post deployment of resources. How to monitor, how to measure, how to create analytics capability, how to build talent capacity, how to ensure we can build different models which will allow further deepening of the green finance activity. And I hope COVID-19 has accelerated the green agenda. COVID-19 has accelerated the sustainable agenda, and COVID-19 has accelerated a true shift to the inclusion agenda. So with that short summary of my thought process around this topic, I will hand over to Amit, and so that we can open this debate to the panel members and reflect more on this. You're mute, Amit.
Second time in a row. Sorry. That was, thank you for summarizing that, your thoughts, Supendu. I think with your thoughts and with what Anand shared, I think that sets a really, really good, strong agenda for our session now for the panel. So, and I have the privilege to be, getting the best out of such a great set of people who bring very diverse viewpoints from different parts. But just to kick it off, I guess, it's really interesting. I like the way you approach Tech for Good with very practical agendas. And I do believe, I think, the pandemic has been the COVID pandemic has been a tipping point. It's a watershed moment. It's been a tipping point, but there are lots of other foundational shifts, right? Those form the theme of what you were sharing with us in the last 10, 15 minutes. So everything from wealth inequality to climate change, unemployment. Just the unemployment numbers at the moment, if you look at the ILO's stats, are completely staggering. So there is a lot of impact, and I think.
Sorry, Amit, I should have mentioned the name of the organization which is collecting this data. Is called Safecast. I completely forgot where I was speaking.
Safecast.
Safecast. So please, if you have access to your PC, it's called safecast.org. It's a beautiful model in my mind, which can challenge everything we're thinking about in the space of green finance. Please look at it. It will enrich our thinking of how to think about green monitoring.
Great.
Sorry.
So, no, please check it out, safecast.org. Chris, perhaps we can put it up on the chat so that everyone can take a look. But I think it's
a beautiful picture to see. If you can put it here, it'll be very impactful.
We can certainly do that. So it's SAFE cast, yeah?
Yeah, safecast.org.
So Chris, when you get a chance, if it is possible at all, the beauty of what we're learning, and as yesterday you referenced SOB digital empathy. One of the things that we're learning is we are learning lots of empathy as well. As we cope with the pandemic, we're finding new ways of working and learning and just going about our day-to-day lives. And one of the things I think that's come out is we're okay with imperfections. So I think, Chris, it would be absolutely fine for you to maybe just, if you're able to, search that and you could share it with us on the screen to share that image. But I think as we get into the panel, there you go. That's Safecast. And
there's a map. You can open the map there. You go top. You go to top. There's a map. Yeah. So this is that lovely map which shows different color. Yeah. Here you go. You see this color. They're actually people like you and me, and who are actually sending real-time data of radiation data, climate data. Imagine if you are done doing a green project and it's showing red color. Means the KPIs are not being met, and it's not a state running the data. It is the citizens who are running the data set.
Yeah, and just on this, I guess citizen-driven data sets. At some point, I think citizens need to also be in more control of data about them, right? So, one of the things that we hope to see emerging, especially in following the pandemic. In healthcare, for example, for ability for people to use their own healthcare data to make the right choices for themselves. At the moment, our data is shared with agencies, but not with us. We don't have the ability to make choices. I think we need to have the ability to make our own choices based on data around us and in context to our environment and so on. But sorry, just getting back into this session. So I'm going to pick up on this green finance piece, Sop, and I'll probably want to kick it off with you. So it seemed from what you shared, and I think you shared some numbers, 40 billion in investments in green finance and so on. But in general, do you feel in the area of ESG investments, do you feel there's enough going on? And are there, especially in Asia, markets that are relevant to us? And what more could be done? And do you have any examples of some leading examples that we could follow?
I think the fear is greenwashing. So I think the fear is that we can always call everything green and call them and watch them as a green and redefine everything that becomes green. I think generating a math to match the numbers is perhaps people will normally tend to do it, and this is what called greenwashing. Well, that's what they call it. But I think the reason I think enough is not being done, because there's an underlying commercial implication. Because you cannot, there's a market reality. And there's an argument, I think the report which has come from Oxford University, which shows that the ROI from green investment in the energy sector is 3 times or something more than a conventional energy investment. So there are examples, and then Oxford report which has come out is a good reference point to look at how the business of green is really panning out. The growth of solar panel, in fact, Al Gore in his speech at DBS talked about in the US, the fastest growing job are technicians who are in the business of installing solar panels. So there are market economics showing more jobs are getting created. There are examples showing that a green investment can give a better ROI or maybe comparable ROI, but that's few. I think there has to be a much more widening of at every possible sector, and a reconfiguration of business models, business products and services, perhaps with a better technology to improve the ROI of going green. Once we get into that process, I think the investment will naturally flow in. And I spoke about a gap of $200 billion. It can go bigger. I think the DBS number over till 2030 talks about $3 trillion new investment opportunity. That's the number, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a growth, there's a desire, but there are certain barriers, maybe partly commercial, partly political, because many countries, when you go and put a green, it may upset the status quo out there. So there's a combination of political, economic, financing complexity as you're trying to unravel this green piece. But progress is made. People are committed. Regulators, policymakers are all saying the right thing. There's a starting point to say the right thing. And hopefully that right thing will convert to right action as we go forward. But many good examples out there.
But also let me add to that, Amit and Subrahman. So as the 40 trillion number, actually, if you just kind of peel the onion there, can you hear me? Yeah. So if you peel the onion of the $40 billion, bulk of it, I think 90% of that is in the UK and Europe. And within that also, I think 80% of that is through exclusionary screening, which means it's really N-1 is what is being called green, right? So it's happening probably in very large ticket sizes, very large projects, and like Subrahman said earlier, it is not getting democratized to the point it is causing financial mistakes. I think that's the big gap that is causing this, and the underlying is obviously is commercial reasons, and we can talk about those as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that we are seeing that might be good examples to share from New Zealand, perhaps?
Yeah, look, I think there are countries that we can learn from each other in terms of what we're doing in our own spaces. I think to start with, the Singapore Stock Exchange made reporting by all listed companies of sustainability a requirement in 2016, and I believe that it's now a compliance requirement, so it must be done, which is brilliant. We haven't quite got there in New Zealand. It is some guidelines have been published in New Zealand for listed companies to consider. But it's nowhere near the mandatory status that it is in Singapore. But look, on the flip side, I think there are, we are, the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Enterprise announced late last year that, our default KiwiSaver retirement scheme providers had to remove fossil fuels from their funds, which I think is a step in the right direction. And while we're still moving through how that's defined, I think it's really exciting in terms of the mandate that's come out of our government, to suggest to the market that it's not just a nice to have, but that we are moving to make it a requirement. So look, I think there's lots of opportunity in this space for both countries. And I think, with everyone getting on board, we'll move a lot faster towards these goals.
Just to build on what Leanna said as well, as I think those directed obligations and the reporting obligations around disclosure of your climate risks and other risks that you would attach back to sustainability, I think is quite key to solving that, that wicked problem that Salt was describing between the political, the commercial, etc. Because I think, you know, if anyone who's in a sort of a highly regulated industry knows that the compliance agenda gets priority. And you know, you've seen that with things like in New Zealand when health and safety changes have come through, when you see it around responsible lending and good culture and conduct, that actually when there becomes a material risk issue for the board of directors, it becomes a priority, and priority drives investment. So I think those jurisdictions that are sort of saying, actually, you've got to disclose your risks, that dissemination of information and that transmission then kicks off a cycle that ultimately leads to more investment. And I think you can also see it not just from a regulated standpoint, but if you look back a couple of years, BlackRock, you know, so large, you know, private equity firm, also sending out to all of their portfolio companies and saying you must adopt ESG principles. It will be a part of their governance framework for all portfolio companies. And you've seen many other investment managers adopt a similar standard. And so you're sort of seeing it on a voluntary basis. People really recognizing and saying, actually, these are fundamental risks and we need to apply, and they can no longer be hidden. That's no longer adequate. And so we've got to, therefore, sort of apply a commercial lens to that. So I think, you know, it's a big gear. It takes a while for that to sort of turn and translate, but I think there's a lot of momentum building.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, I think also, I mean, Sot was talking about, you know, some of the figures which are fairly significant. But you go back to 2010 in the UK, and then you sort of fast forward to 2019 when they did a piece of research. $92 billion was invested in clean tech in the UK alone. Significant investment. Yeah, one would argue the first country in the world to actually create the Green FinTech Bank, or GIB as it's obviously now known. But equally, actually, it's a shift in mindset and a little bit maybe in shift in cultural thinking, that the younger generation actually they are rely on the return on their investment. It's actually where's it been placed. And if I think about, you know, 2 or 3 years ago when we saw the output from the Panama Papers, there were certain jurisdictions around the world actually that came out fairly well, and New Zealand was certainly one of them. So I think we're at the precipice, and dare I say something fairly controversial, I actually think that the global pandemic was a bit of a necessary evil to really accelerate our thinking about what the future actually looks like. You know, you see a change in places like Venice, you know, you see smog being lifted from cities, and clearly then there's the appetite of what could we be doing, but more importantly, actually, what should we be doing to invest actually in the long-term future of the planet? Because, you know, certainly some of us on the call won't be here to see some of these changes, but we certainly want to be part of the discussion. So it is exciting. It's taken something fairly global to put it on the map, but we're here now. The conversation is flowing, and, you know, as opposed to my point, let's just go on and do it, because to Leanne's point, some great opportunities out there, I think, for both countries.
Yeah. So just for the benefit of anyone who's joined now, we're in the panel session, and just wanted to do a quick intro of the panelists again. So we've got Anand Ranchor, who's the head of innovation from Kiwibank. We've got Sapnendu Mohanty, the Chief FinTech Officer for the Monetary Authority of Singapore. We've got Liana Cohn-Hardy, who's the founder and CEO of Finapster, an innovative app that actually allows you to make the right choices as a consumer. And you've got Dave Rouse, who's the founder and CEO of another very innovative business focused on driving sustainability choices, Carbon Click. You've got James Brown, who's the GM for FinTech New Zealand, and we're also joined by Dheeraj Chaudhary, who's the principal advisor for FinTech with Ecosystem, and a former CEO of one of the applicants for a digital bank in Singapore. So just, you know, it was really interesting to hear the conversations around the top end of the pyramid, which is, you know, institutions and their accountability. I think it'd be great to also look at the pyramid as a whole, the consumers, right? Because consumers today are becoming more conscious and aware. They want to have a choice. And sustainability choices, of course, are not just focused on green, it's focused on other factors such as, you know, have they bought products that have been, you know, manufactured or supplied ethically, with fair wages, without exploitation of labor, and so on, and of course, environmentally friendly. So question, I guess, and I might kind of kick this off this question off with Dave, say, what is the level of awareness you think the consumers have, and how do we fulfill their need to have that choice?
Thanks, Amit. So consumers, all over the world, there's a driving force in consumers, and it's particularly driven by the millennial group. But in New Zealand, 80% of consumers care about climate change as something that they want to take action on. 69% was the result out of the latest Reuters survey. So you're talking the vast majority of the population, and they're starting to talk with their wallet as well. So they're asking these businesses to be more sustainable, to look at their packaging, to look at their carbon footprint. And carbon is just a catalyst for restoring the balance in the world. It's something that we have a currency around, which is great. But they're actually driving this change, which is stemming up to director level, and that kind of complements the shift that we need at that director level. As Anand mentioned, we've got in New Zealand, for example, climate risk is seen as a legal risk to directors, not including it on their board agendas. So when you've got these driving forces plus your market, the overwhelming majority of your market starting to make financial decisions or want to make financial decisions based on your environmental impact, that's really powerful. In New Zealand, we're a bit lucky. It's part of our DNA. We've lived quite a sustainable life cycle. So we tend to be able to teach other countries around the world how we've done that. And I see us as having that opportunity to share our learnings with the world and help them on this journey.
And look, I echo that sentiment from a responsible investment angle as well. There was a Morgan Stanley survey, they call it Rich Thinking, and the outcome of that survey discovered that 84% of women not wanted to invest responsibly, not in the way that all the sin stocks, they call them, were removed, but they actually wanted to focus on companies that were doing good. And this is echoed by, they found 67% of men as well. So, the mentality and the desire is there. I think it's just really being able to provide the tools in order for people to be able to do that is really key. So that sort of comes back to Anand's point around, what enablers can we provide to enable people who want to make these conscious decisions. And look, I think, one of the keys while we are able to think about this while we're in development is, perhaps setting some expectations around, the measurements we want to see and how we want to monitor them. I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment, and we've probably all seen them, is the discrepancy between what people think is important. And there is obviously that results in disparate data, which makes it obviously very hard for people at the other end, the consumers, to be able to compare apples with apples. And so, that does result in that perception of greenwashing where, if we are able to sort of standardize some of the metrics that get measured and really help people understand how they can measure it, then I think, there's an opportunity there for people to, at the other end, say, okay, well, I understand the inputs now, and therefore I should be able to understand the outputs. And I think that's a real good opportunity for us at the moment while we're in development to be able to approach some of these issues.
If I can step in here, I'll give an example. And it's a little bit of a different take on this question. Right to the crisis, there was an example from India, from Gujarat. There's a bank called Seva Bank. And for many years, they've been promoting something called community banking. And basically, instead of people going and traveling to large cities, burning fuel and creating more green impact on large cities, the jobs are being created and developed called Women's Self-Help Group. So essentially, women in villages, small town, building products, community connectivity, community banking, and they're staying back at the home and they're building product which is largely sustainable products. And during the crisis, that bank actually had a 3 times increase in deposit. in bank deposit. Where every bank during the crisis had withdrawal, they had an increase in deposit because they had a capacity in the small, in the villages and the small town. They were actually producing masks because as capacity, there was certain capacity, they could actually pivot to products and services, which was a necessity for that period of time. So having a very, very thoughtful community banking, community development, bring jobs back to very small towns, and creating that capacity, to me, is a combination of sustainable banking, green banking, and a long-term resiliency into our society and our system. So there are examples which, and all these women had a sustainable pension plan. So even though the crisis, they didn't have to go anywhere. They could dip into their emergency pension structures to receive some money to sustain themselves when things were not going well. So there are examples which can be taken from countries which may not be looking like New Zealand and Singapore, but we can take some of these principles and adopt them in our own respective countries.
Yeah, and I'd follow on for that. I mean, that is a great example, and one I can bring to the discussion. This was back in my days when I was the deputy chair of Transparency International, and although technically you'd argue it's not necessarily financial services, but completely as part of the supply chain was actually impacted. There was an organisation called NZ Uniforms, and they sourced a lot of their materials actually offshore. And they were very, very ethical in the way that they manufactured their product, the support that they actually give to the workers, and all of that nature. After their due diligence and working with a said organisation for a period of time, it actually came to light that they weren't actually as ethical, and they weren't investing back into the organisation equally into their employees, into the staff. So they had a very difficult decision to make, because they're an organisation that manufactures goods, and obviously they've got timelines and deadlines, obviously from a customer perspective. And they made the decision to actually go out and actually halt manufacturing and go back to all of their customers and advise them that they would not deliver the product to them. What they would do is actually source a provider that they felt met the requirements of their ethical standards. Now, fairly challenging thing to discuss around obviously a leadership or a board, but what they actually found, that every single customer and the orders that were already in place stood by them and actually supported the bravery of them, that actually they committed to maintaining not only their standards, but their ethics in working with other providers around the world. So I think back to Sup's point, that we've got great examples here in New Zealand, but equally we should also be looking around the world of the types of things that we can adopt and we can implement fairly quickly.
Yeah. And look, I think that is one of the key driving principles, if I can say so, for the Singapore FinTech Festival, is to look at innovation that can actually be leveraged cross-border, drive collaboration, and actually achieve a much greater impact for humanity in general. Outside of course, the big commercial focus as well. So, I like this example. Sorry, so you're on mute.
Vaida, I mean, I just want to push back on this mental segregation of tech for good and commercially good. They're all same. They're
Yes.
all same. They're all same. They're not different. We just have to think differently. Sorry.
Good point. No, good point. And I guess that's the direction where the thinking needs to be. So we had some good examples. Sop, you shared that example from Gujarat. And I guess the question for the panel is, how do we take some of these smaller scale sustainability initiatives that we've discussed and create more consumer awareness and demand? And then, how do you make it real? How do you correlate it back to the mainstream economy? Any thoughts on that? Anyone wants to take that very wordy question?
Yeah, so let me just set the stage from what I think. So I think all of us are pretty much in agreement there is enough and more funds chasing the ESG mandate, and there is no dearth of funds chasing. We've got the tech ability, the digital ability, and proven it over and over again. There's enough of examples. There's consumer interest because this whole millennial segment is, as I studied some courses, their propensity to invest in ESG related or inclusion products was already there. But I think one missing link, as I see it, and I'd like to discuss this here, is how do we actually bring all this back into the real economy? And that's the part where it kind of is a little fractured. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you an example. I was running a P2P business earlier for SMEs, right? Now, investing or lending to an SME segment is one of the ESG goals, right? It should actually it should have a double bottom line impact, right? The point is there is no real economy fit where you can get recognition of a DBL. How does that metric get absorbed into the mainstream? And how do you get a financial benefit out of that so that your cost of operation comes down and hence you can then continue serving the underserved segment? And just to take that example of Seva Bank, like you said, so if they were to get the financial benefit in terms of cost of funds, delivery, etc., lower, it becomes scalable. Right? I think that's the missing link in this entire fintech / green sustainable ecosystem. And it'll have to be it a mix of taxonomy, it's a mix of access to global VCU markets, recognition of DBL, making a metric which is absorbed and mainstream in the digital banks that are coming up, whatever these are, but there has to be a plug-in into the real economy.
I can probably add to that as well. I think carbon is quite a good example of where this is heading. So we've had the enablement with open banking and digital banks to actually, you've seen an example that Anand mentioned, like Kogo, which is using the data from open banking to actually give you a carbon footprint from your transactions. Now, although the accuracy is still wanting at the moment, we're certainly heading in that direction where you can attribute the number of kgs of carbon associated with an activity or a spend to a price associated with that as well, which can help to influence those decisions. And at a business level as well, maybe one day compliance at a business level, and some businesses do have to comply already to the various emissions trading schemes. That can be priced into the decision making, and that's a really good lever into other similar currencies. So if you look at what Green Collar are doing in Australia, for example, they're the largest carbon supplier in the APEC region. They are also pioneering something called reef credits, which is where they look at the restoration of the Great Barrier Reef and the impact of development on that beyond just carbon. So that comes to a point where these credits are tradable. They have a value to them. They're like a three-dimensional currency. There's a quantity, a value, but also a wider qualitative value to them, which people can decide if they want to support or not. So when you're planning a development or something, you can cost in the wider environmental impact. I see that as being the way forward because if you see that working effectively, you could build in all sorts of social and health benefits as well. And you're effectively pricing like an end-to-end life cycle of a product. You're effectively pricing an end-to-end life cycle of wider effect of a service or a business transaction.
And yeah,
I think that's the new capitalism of tomorrow, is not just looking at profit as in pure money, as we have of the past, but I think profit in the future will include things like what's our environmental impact, and where a company does have some sort of impact, it will affect their bottom line, but in a way that we can associate it in a numerical value. And I think that's a really exciting place that we should be heading towards.
Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say is data. So if we think about New Zealand's actually one of the most connected countries.
James, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm not on mute.
Yeah, now we can.
Oh, that's very strange. My apologies. So yeah, sorry, what I was saying was maybe around the sort of data. We have vast amounts of data at our disposal. We know how to access the data. We understand it better than we've done before. We, New Zealand, are a more connected country than we previously have been. So it's how do we break that down into manageable chunks? So, you know, some people find it very different to say, okay, by the year 2050, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 0.8%. Well, what does that mean for me? So because we actually now are actually on our devices more and more, then there's applications, there's various mechanisms and tools out there that actually bring it to life for me as an individual, which then gives me the ownership of it, of actually that I actually can do something on my own, knowing that I'm actually contributing to the greater good. And that actually becomes a little bit of thing. I actually use it a little bit like going to the gym. You weigh yourself on Monday morning, and when you weigh yourself again on Friday, you've seen an improvement and you're quite excited. It's the same sort of context. So when you look at your sort of, let's call it your carbon footprint on the Monday, but through your activities and everything else on the Friday, you've actually made a difference. And then you extrapolate that out to your friends, then you do it to your society, your community, your country, and then around the globe. Then fundamentally, we're actually moving very swiftly towards what we're actually all trying to achieve. So for me, we talk about years ago, data becoming the new oil or the new gold. We now have the opportunity to actually fundamentally use that to actually address some of these huge issues that we're facing into right now.
Sorry, I was on mute as well. So look, we've had I'll probably come back to this topic that around green and so on, but I also wanted to cover off some of the other sustainability issues, and you know, we've touched on those briefly. You know, inclusion. You know, we're living in very interesting times, right? Because on the one hand, we've got this aging population who admittedly actually have become a lot more digital savvy in the last 3 months, at least much larger proportion than previously. But in general, we've got an aging population. How do we ensure, and SOP referenced this example from Gujarat around micro pensions and so on. How do we ensure financial inclusion and security for them? At the same time, you know, we have a completely new breed of the next generation. Those are digital natives that basically make decisions based on social media. You know, and so we've got this dichotomy in terms of the generations that we have and how digitally inclusive they are as such. But in that respect, what do you think we need to be doing, or could we be doing more to gear up the aging population with respect to financial inclusion and, of course, financial security for themselves?
I mean, I know, Sop, you'll jump in here. You'll have lots to say. But I mean, very quickly, I mean, I'll give you a quick example. You know, 2.5 weeks before we went to lockdown level 4 here in New Zealand, I interviewed Anand's boss, Steve, at Kiwibank. And one of the questions that we posed was the non-acceptance of checks moving forward. And Steve gave a really good reasoning behind why that would actually be the case. However, fast forward 2.5 weeks, we're lockdown level 4 and almost became a bit of a moot point. But the situation is that actually Kiwibank was already in that sort of partway through that journey in the transformation of their customers from, let's call it, analog to digital. And they've taken quite a responsible role of what I call the duty of care to take people on the journey. It wasn't just actually that on Friday, we're not going to accept checks, and on Monday, you just have to use this technology. So that's a societal thing. And you mentioned there, Amit, that we, in certain parts of the world, the aging population, and actually you know, what we've got to be mindful of, that we're actually living a little bit longer. And actually some of that wealth won't necessarily actually fall down to the kids. It may indeed actually bypass the generation and fall to the kids' kids. And the way they think about society, climate change, ethical investing is going to be, again, very different to the way that we think about it right now. So we have to have that really sort of open and honest conversation about what we should and could be doing right now to actually help them adopt to new digitized tools. We've already talked about some of that earlier on, but being very clear, I suppose, in what the ask is, and then providing the products and solutions that they will indeed want to adopt at that point in time. So I think we're on that little bit of a precipice, but equally quite an exciting opportunity.
So just adding to that, what James spoke about, let's get the numbers right. So we are looking at by in the next 20, 30 years, a close to $16 trillion pension gap. That's the big number, headline number. And this is with the best optimistic our return on the pension investments we're doing today. So the numbers are quite large, primarily driven by the growing old age population. So you need a lot of money to sustain a population which is going to extend the life to another 20, 30 years. At this current state, we don't have capacity, not the financial resources to fund that need as it stands today. The second thing is the economic backbone of many countries are SMEs. And the people who work in this micro SMEs, I don't have a better way to say it, they work till the death, because there's no way the moment they stop working, everything stops. You can look across different countries, examples where they don't have a plan of retirement. They don't think, there's nothing for them to think I will stop working and I can live off my rest of my life from a social security safety net. That doesn't exist in many countries. So these are the real challenges. We have always looked other side. We think things will get away, but it is just growing. It's just growing and bigger. It's going exponentially. There are many thinkers, strategists are thinking about how to address this problem. While in this panel we can't solve that problem, but at least I can share that large part of this likely feasible solution will come from distributing the wealth disparity today we have, and it has to come from a very different economic construct of democratizing the economic participation of people from a highly concentrated. We get so excited about FANG and all the acronym we give to large corporates. How do we expand that to a lot more people who can participate in this economic growth? And hopefully that distribution of wealth will create enough financial capacity for us to solve that long-term gap in supporting the retirement age, from covering from health expenses, living expenses, and to your twilight life, where you got to find a healthy way to live your life till the end. So there are these challenges, but it has to come through very different way of architecting our economic construct. And I strongly believe that this idea of pushing economic activity to the villages, to the small town, to women, deep into their home, will help to distribute some of this opportunity to a wider set of people.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, deeply embed this into community, I think, is one way that we're definitely going to tackle this. And even, I mean, you know, where's the stress testing that we're doing at the moment around things like the gender pay gap? Now, you might ask, you know, why am I talking about the gender pay gap? But the reality is, if we're statistically seeing that 18 to 24-year-old females are not investing in their future, and then we actually add in the gender pay gap, what does that look like in retirement? It's huge. So there's a significant obstacle here in terms of education. But I think also, we mentioned earlier on, you know, if you look at KiwiSaver and, you know, people think I'm in KiwiSaver, therefore I'm going to be okay, Jack. So we've still got quite a lot of work to do. But in New Zealand, we can sometimes default to the long-term financial plan is investment in property. And I wonder if it's not too controversial to think about, is there the opportunity to be a little bit more diverse in our thinking and look at what our financial portfolio could or should look like, adopting some of that investment in ethical and sustainable goals? Just a point, just a view.
And I just want to summarize it as a community banking. In fact, if you look at Raghuram Rajan's latest book, The Third Pillar, he talks about there's a financial system, there's a market, there is a policy makers, and we need to have community. We need to bring the third pillar into this discussion, how to build a stronger community, because community can respond to crisis better than anybody else. And in the current construct in large city, with anonymity becoming a way of life, there's no community around you. So that we have lost the third pillar in our life, the community around us. So we've got to bring that back to the discussion, and community banking could be way forward.
I agree, and I do wonder if our traditional approach has been focused, around financial education, which not everyone can engage with. I think there are opportunities for different ways for people to engage with their investments, with the way they manage money, to get them more involved and to get them thinking about things like retirement before they turn 50. Because, by the time they turn 50, it is too late. They need to be thinking about it when they're 20 or even younger. And I think, there are ways that we can engage them. Coming back to some comments before, focusing on individuals and what individuals can do and making them feel good about what they're doing. And yes, it is different for every individual, but there are ways that we can allow for them to do that and to feel good and achieve what we want them to achieve, which is, financial well-being and retirement, or, financial well-being and doing whatever it is they're setting out to achieve. I think there are opportunities there. And that's what we're looking at with Finapsa as well, is to enable people to be able to invest in a way that's aligned with their values, as a way of engaging with them. Because while we know that once they are engaged, then they will take the time to learn about their finances, become more engaged, and look to contribute more, because they know the ultimate outcome for them and for what they're investing in is good. And so that's a slightly different tack that we're taking, but it does seem to be working at the moment.
And I mean, I also love, technology is the enabler, let's be honest. And it actually then impacts things like the financial inclusion. And if you think about some of the government terminology, both in Singapore and here in New Zealand, when we actually think about new products or new solutions to market, it's bringing everybody on the journey. We definitely don't want to be creating things that are exclusive. In the olden days, wealth management or wealth advisors were exactly that, for the wealthy. But products in recent years, out of the Kiwi Accelerator, like Hatch, Kernel Wealth, and Sharesies, and amongst others, and then the education piece, what Aliani's doing as well. I mean, we're moving in the right direction, and I think that, to Sop's point earlier on, create the opportunity for the collective good to come together. You can get some really cool stuff done.
Okay, great. So I want to move gears a little bit to microfinance. We talked about micro pensions, but are we seeing? Sop, this is a question for you, and then I probably want to pose it to Anand as well from a New Zealand perspective. If you're seeing something at the grassroots level in terms of microfinance and actually supporting, since it plugs into supporting communities and actually building up that piece. Are you seeing any major trends in that area?
No, I use the word not microfinance. I call it a continuum of micro product. Sometimes we maybe that's correct, because we had to start somewhere. I think at the end of microfinance is not equal to giving a lot of credit. I think that's the starting point, but that's not the only thing in microfinance. The true sustainable construct should be, why deny poor people a complete stack of financial services? Micro savings, micro insurance, micro pension, micro investment, micro payment facility. So provide a complete stack. Don't cloud yourself by just giving microfinance, because microfinance is good, but it doesn't really solve the broader thing, the broader need we are trying to solve here. if I'm receiving a microcredit, I should also be thinking how to save money from my business. I should be also thinking about how to earmark some money for my pension. I should also thinking about how to buy some micro insurance product. I should also think about why can't I participate in a $1 or a cent ETF where I can be part of the GDP growth on stock market. While we can think about various ways to protect poor, but give that opportunity for a poor at the bottom of the pyramid to be part of the whole financial package, not just leave them that I'm going to give you credit and either you pay or it doesn't matter, it's just a political tool to get political equity, rather than we should think about a much more comprehensive way to think about solving the bottom of the pyramid challenge.
Yeah, look, just building on what Sop said, I fully agree. While Kiwibank participates in microfinance through a partnership with Ngā Tangata, I think the products of the future that are really going to really move the needle is really how do you kind of get away from this kind of education first mentality and actually just how do you build it, the smarts into the product. And I think that's not just a thing at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, but I think that actually kind of transcends all the way up the pyramid, because actually most of us don't want to be a banker or an accountant in terms of as our day job. Those are just things that should work, and actually a lot of it can be kind of automated and rules-based. You know, there's still room for agency of the consumer to exercise control and saying, what do I value? I'm still in control. But actually, you know, it feels like we're playing at a very low level of detail when it comes to the sort of the manual nature of how we operate our finances today. And I think that's true even in sort of developed markets like New Zealand and Singapore, as it is in sort of emerging markets. So I think, you know, there is a sort of a tectonic shift that comes in the way that we think about our financial service products. And if I think about, and this seems funny going from a conversation around microfinance to Tesla, but you know, Tesla doesn't try and sell, at the heart of it, it's not trying to sell a clean energy story in terms of its car. It sells you a great product that is absolutely attractive and that you want for, you know, for the fact that it is just a great automobile and everything else. But actually the clean energy story is at the heart of that business. And I think, again, that's probably the next one of the other shifts that we need to think about in terms of green and sustainable tech. It's much in the same way. You've still got to create a really attractive product. You've actually got to create that attraction for customers, and the goodness can be baked in, but that's detail that actually shouldn't consume the consumer in terms of how they use it.
Well, that kind of emphasizes the point Sop was making earlier, that tech for good, it's not a different issue from commercials, right? Tesla is a great example in that respect.
And just to add to Anne's point, I think Liane made that point also, the financial literacy. I think financial literacy is not a standalone service. It is embedded in every product you are talking. And I believe financial literacy works best when you are showing something at the point of transaction, not after or before. Because every time I do something, if I get to know what is the right way to do, I think it will stay with me. I have grown up with my parents hitting little stick on me when I do mistake, not before and after. So at the point of making some choices, if you are given a little tick, I think that will work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just sort of picking up from that one, I wanted to shift gears a little bit to our next generation. I touched on those earlier. We didn't get into it. You know, you look at this great fintech story from the UK, Revolut, right? They've had a good run, right? And the entire model is based on this social referrals. It comes through the social referral model, and you know the valuation keeps going up. If I remember last, I think the valuation was about $6-7 billion. Or sterling, maybe, I don't know. But the point is that it's based on this ethos of building a community. Now, they may not have achieved that goal in full, but it's a way to demonstrate that there are ways to create these products that you can tap into the next generation. And perhaps if you package some of these social good pieces in there, I do believe the next generation is a little bit more aware of you know, and a bit more conscious of their responsibility towards society and the planet. I think it's just the nature of the education system in the last couple of decades as well. So perhaps there's an opportunity to empower some of those products coming in. I don't know if you guys see that more in terms of these socially driven products that can actually bring in some of these social good causes, but also bring in some great products.
Absolutely. And actually, if you look at what Tencent have done with their apps, and the number of trees planted, and then they've built that in terms of in terms of their super app, so you can see really good examples of doing that at quite considerable scale.
Yep. Just as a side note, completely unrelated to sustainability, Sob, I wanted to ask you. I saw this graph recently, and it compared the number of clicks required to open a bank account for a customer account. And obviously there were a few Singaporean banks there, but it was topped actually globally by OCBC Bank, which was 22 clicks, which was less clicks than it takes to actually open an account with Revolut. Just thought I wanted to know what's the secret magic sauce in Singapore with these banks like DBS and OCBC and that are driving some of this innovation.
Well, there's no magic sauce for that. And in fact, I've been championing this not only in Singapore. I think we're inspired by what happened in India. Is that if you build a national rail where there's a trusted identity and a trusted data set, I don't need to fill any of this data to open a bank account. You just need a click, which validates who I am, and it gives, and a second click, give me a consent to pull all my trusted data from the government database. My bank account is open. So there cannot be anything faster than that. Today, the problem with a lot of this market that to open a bank account, you have to prove who you are with some 5 documents. Then once you prove who you are, then you have to prove all the data you are supplying as part of your account opening process through evidence and all this thing. And that makes the process so complicated. But if you have a national rail where my digital ID is my authentication and my way of identifying myself, and all the 30 data you need to open account is available in a trusted platform, which is validated, sanitized, and it is authorized by the government. You press the button, consent for the data, you open a bank account, magic. So it's magic in the sense of many people, but it's not really any magic. It's just a simple construct that if we truly want to build a digital economy, it has to run on digital rails. It's as simple as that. You cannot run a digital economy on a physical rail. It's not going to work.
Just to take an example forward, I mean, why restrict, and I'm thinking as Blue Sky as everybody else here, why restrict ourselves to just the national account opening? When I'm traveling to another country, or my daughter's going to study in another country, she wants to open an account, let's say in New Zealand, why are we only talking business sans borders? It should be data sans borders, is a data corridor that cuts across Singapore and New Zealand. So that could probably make the magic as offset the cross border.
Yes, and ultimately the real beauty comes when each of the stack are connected, trusted, and that's where policymakers have to agree on data policy, data exchanges, interoperable standards. And once we connect, there's a domestic rail and we connect the international rail. So any plane landing in any airport don't have to figure out the construct of the airport anymore. So I hope anybody lands in some country don't have to figure out how to do a bank account opening, because you are carrying your national identity and national data, and it can be accessed by any jurisdiction, and you open a bank account. So as the airlines industry have standardized so much thing globally to just make travel so seamless, because of the airport standards, the IATA standards for landing, the procedures, while we have taken it for granted, imagine every day a plane lands in so many different countries and the pilot is seamlessly giving us an experience all the way till land in the airport, get out of the immigration. It's quite fairly well organized process we just taken for granted. I think data has to reach that state of seamlessness through cross-border agreement.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think, open banking is a good first step in that direction. Because what you talk about, SOP, is incredibly complex when you're talking about data across borders. But in the age of data, having banks open up their own data sets and making that available, back to their customers, but also B, to those people who can, add value to to that data and provide the customers, you know, a service that the banks can't currently offer. You know, I think that's a real good step in the first step in that direction.
Yeah. So yesterday, SOP, in the session that we had around the DIPA, digital trade, and referencing the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, and we were talking about digital trade. One would imagine that this digital infrastructure you talk about, and you know, Dheeraj referenced, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be limited to national infrastructure. It needs to be leveraged internationally. Digital trade, I would imagine, is going to be a big enabler of various sustainability goals. Right? There are a number of areas that can tick the box. In, you know, simple things being driving e-payments, driving e-invoicing, paperless invoicing, less, you know, less sort of. I mean, we're not going to be traveling as much in the short to mid term. We know that we're not going anywhere. So it requires a whole lot of trade to be done digitally. Do you believe that there's more that can be done in terms of that trusted data and that whole piece around digital trade? Can that become a big driver of some of our sustainability initiatives as well?
You asking me?
Yeah, well, it's for everyone, but I thought since so
I think Dheeraj spoke about the business as border. I think that's the primer for getting there. I think for the panelists here and for the people who are hearing this, the best outcome would be, as I mentioned yesterday, a small-time producer in New Zealand is talking to an importer in Philippines or in Singapore, and both the people are matching each other in a digital open platform, and they see that there's a price point, there's a product match. They agree, yes, and the moment they agree, the product is shipped out of the location, and the whole financing, logistics, certification of good, custom clearance comes as a digital stack which you just subscribe to. And once you all subscribe to that whole process, both parties are just executing a trade. And this whole thing is happening for two parties who don't have financial resources, and that connectivity and the networking or that understanding of how to move goods from A location to B location overseas if you're small. So what goes behind is a lot of digitization of many parts of a trade. And each of them have massive opportunity to automate, to digitize. And there is a role which is evolving, is building what we call as digital assets, which smart contracts. I spoke about in some of the forum about 2020 will become the year of blockchain for trade finance, primarily because a lot of this complexity of moving trade across border has to do with the ability to merge two essential rail. When you do cross-border trade, you move a good from location A to location B. That's one set of process: logistic clearance, custom clearance, letter of credit, and all these things. And there's a second leg called, or the parallel leg called moving money. You pay each other. Both these things don't talk to each other today, and that's the center of the problem today. That we have a payment rails which is not connected to a goods and service transfer rail, and all the intermediaries are doing is to merge and validate these two parts together at every step. If I moved a good from Auckland to a port in Manila before it comes to Singapore, somebody checking that before moving the money. So there are a whole set of intermediaries who are managing these two rails and trying to coordinate, trying to ensure there is no fraud, there is no default, and ensure that both goods and service move, payments move, and ultimately get reconciled. Imagine we merging these two into a single contract. As the goods and services are moving, the payment is also moving along with the contract. I think that can significantly reduce a whole set of intermediaries who are now a clog to the system for a global cross-border trade, especially for small producers.
Yeah, and linking it back to the SME segment again, there's $20 billion of unserved SME needs in Singapore, and out of that, about 55% of it is because of, as we just discussed, lazy money, which is paid documentation not linking with the payments, right? If you kind of combine the two, the lazy money can become actually unleashing the power of the SME.
Yeah. So just as we, I want to pose one more point to the panel before we open up to a couple of questions from the audience. I wanted to ask. We touched on blockchain, so Prindy just touched on blockchain, and I wanted to ask, and we started off this discussion with the various sustainability goals that we have. I wanted to understand whether blockchain is going to play a greater role, and is it going to be, is it really going to help in creating greater traceability around issues of sustainability, but also, fair wages, ensuring that, we know that, you address issues around labor exploitation and so on. Is that going to become, is that going to play a very significant role?
I think the blockchain by design has got elements of solving this problem. In the idea of distributed processing, it reduces a lot of dependency on a central party, and that helps in unclogging a lot of this problem in the supply chain and anything we do. Even the green finance, having a distributed, trusted data set or provenance of the system is part of the DLT construct. How to prove that the data is trusted. So there are elements of blockchain which will go in facilitating this new construct. However, I would like to say that that something we are missing in this puzzle is the network itself, and the growth of 5G network is the last piece of this puzzle, because you can smart contract, you can code all these things, you can digitally convert a lot of documents, financial assets, and bring it together. But you need a highly efficient and a optimally processing bandwidth network, and that answer lies with the 5G network. So as countries are putting the 5G capacity as we speak, it comes beautifully at a time where the distributed processing, the complexity of a smart contract, and the processing horsepower to bring it together gets solved by a 5G network. So 5G becomes that last mile enabler of a distributed based technology, which is processing while not depending on a central party clearance at every step.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and I suppose what I would say there really is adoptive, is in terms of adoptive technology. If you sort of go back not very far in time, when you mentioned blockchain, unfortunately, people badged it with cryptocurrency and loss of money and IPOs and all sorts of stuff. Whereas I think what we're seeing now, it's more around what the technology actually enables. And I think on the back of that, we're actually seeing higher and greater rates of adoption. So I think we can be careful, actually, I suppose, how we position it, but absolutely, to Sot's point, its ability to track and trace, I think, will be something that we'll see much more of. And there's been a couple of examples that Anand and I have shared there from a New Zealand perspective that I think we're already seeing. They've they're game changers in that particular space. So I think we will see more of that further on down the line.
I think also from my perspective, in the carbon market, where you've got a three-dimensional currency, where you've got a quality element as well, which the voluntary market is paying a lot of attention to, the opportunity to distribute your validation process is a really good use case for blockchain. So if you have small scale projects that you want to have approved by multiple people that can do so with either uploading images or approving because they happen to be local to the project, that's a really good opportunity to fund those smaller scale projects that can't afford the audit processes or don't qualify for the emissions trading schemes issuance of carbon credits. So I'm quite excited as to what that could bring in the years ahead of us. We're not quite there yet, but I can see this being a real enabler of another level of green fintech.
I think that just to add Dave's point, on the carbon credit side, there are already work has been done or getting done where a DLT-based technology being used to capture carbon credit and use that as a tokenized asset to interchange with other assets. So I think there's and maybe there are further development going the space, because carbon credit, one of the challenges is provenance of the carbon credit itself. How to ensure that they're not they are accurate and they are really the true carbon credit. And if you are trading off carbon credit with something else, I hope you're not trading for something evil. You're trading for something good. So how to ensure that that thing really turns out to be a holistic approach to changing the behavior of people as they accumulate carbon credit, and that hopefully in long run changes the behavior and our attitude toward green financing.
Great. So thank you, Sop. A couple of questions that I want to take from the audience. I just want to put them out there. We are running out of time. So, so one of the questions says, Singapore companies have the regulatory requirements for sustainability reporting. How can countries, accounting bodies, and audit firms ensure companies are capable of disclosure and meeting these reporting requirements? So, anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's we have just, I think if you do this week only, we have put together a public consulting paper on the same space to how do we, and again, the key issue is the taxonomy. I think the taxonomy has to be agreed by different parties. I think that's still a work in progress, but there are already ESG standards, ESG reporting standards, ESG formats to start work. In fact, we have also, MAS also has put a scheme to support any of this activity where we can assist, and we have financial resources to help companies raising money through green finance to access such auditing and accounting services. So there are work in progress. I would, to justify all the work MAS is doing in this space, we have put together, if I'm not in our own MAS website, and if whoever asked this question can have my email address, and I can send a bunch of comprehensive information around that space.
Yeah, and look, I have a couple of comments on that as well. I know some of those frameworks quite well in terms of reporting in a sustainable manner. And yes, some of them are incredibly challenging. I do wonder though, in some instances where companies have been reporting for a while, there is a perception that it's turning into a bit of a tick box exercise, which is unfortunate. Because that takes the onus away from have we improved to yes, we've done it this year. And that's obviously not the way we want to go. We want to be able to see that improvement has been made year on year, and that the reporting is consistent year on year. And I think there are potentially other ways that we could look at this reporting. So rather than simply measuring our our impact for the year, I wonder if there's a way that we could compete in a race to zero. You might have heard that phrase before. So it's more about the monitoring and making sure that actions are being taken to decrease rather than simply to measure. I think there are opportunities in that space.
Great. Can I just close with one last question from the audience? How do we see the banks working with the fintech companies rather than as competition to drive financial independence at the bottom of the pyramid? Who wants to take that?
But I think to me, banks will struggle to work with bottom of the pyramid because by design, the systems are costly. So the best way for them to work with the bottom of the pyramid is to get a fintech player who is deep into that system and ask them to plug into a banking system, and they both of them can take advantage of the strength each of them have. rather than bank trying to replicate everything and to solve every problem. So a bank has its own strength, the strength of the financial stability, the whole the deposit base, everything is out there. If there's a fintech which is working on micro pension or a micro insurance, they have a captive audience which they're serving, and they need an asset manager on the back. They can plug into an asset manager saying, look, I'm going to collect all this contribution. Give me an asset management company which can plug into my ecosystem and provide the necessary infrastructure for running a pension plan. Similar for insurance. So they can be the last mile distributor, but they need somebody in the back end to support the back end infrastructure for covering the insurance support or investment side. Similarly, I think there are many examples where fintechs who have already entrenched in the last mile. They need to have an API services, some kind of construct, and they can plug into the banks, and both parties can coexist beautifully.
Yeah,
there are many examples.
I completely agree with Sop, and I think you've seen over the last sort of 12 or 18 months a real growth in the banking as a service adoption by banks who are recognizing that actually they can't be everything to everybody. And this is a great way for them to enable providing all those services that Sop talked about, and simply providing that as an API so that others can go out and provide those targeted services to different markets. And that whole democratization of finance, you see that in markets everywhere, and investing Acorns locally, that in Sharesies and Hatch, and saying how do they make those services available. And you can see that in payments and FX. Effectively that's what Revolut has done. And so I think the good thing is that even at the bottom of the pyramid, mobile access and connectivity is still permeating even in emerging nations, and so that becomes sort of a key equalizer.
I think the realization of this coexistence is coming into banks now. I can recall when I was in banks 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, we used to be paranoid about this fintechs, new digital companies coming in and taking the share of the pie. But I think now it's become very different, and a real example here is that banks in their own risk policies, and it's a function of actually cost to serve, cost of credit, and cost of funds, right? So in all these three factors, they have realized that they've got a separate segment to cater to. For example, banks do not give loans to SMEs who are less than 6 months old, right? And that's a huge segment in all upcoming economies. And fintechs have taken that space beautifully, and that's where alternate lending and that's big one. And as soon as these customers or these SMEs grow in size and create a credit footprint, they can migrate to banks with larger, longer collateralized loans. So it's a perfect I think ecosystem that is evolving. If you ask me, it could it have evolved faster? Yes, but yes, it's taken its time, but it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. All I was going to say, I mean, for me, it's a little bit like an old-fashioned love story. It's sort of you recognize that opposites actually do attract, but you try and resist it for as long as you possibly can. But ultimately, actually, you realize that working together actually creates a far more beautiful outcome, and that's exactly what we've seen. The partnerships around the world, with Kiwibank and some of the other New Zealand banks here, and actually working with, collaborating with, taking equity in that we've not necessarily seen, to Deirdre's point, maybe move as quickly as we possibly could. But the simple fact is that it's a little bit like your DNA strand. Kiwibank's DNA might be green and other banks might be blue or red. But what they recognize in actually delivering what the customer requires when the customer requires it sometimes can be facilitated by actually taking that piece out and bringing in someone else that does that just far better and far more cost effective, to the point that was raised earlier on. So I think, beautiful love story, and let's see where the next chapter takes us.
Right. And on that note, we'll continue on with the love story, hopefully, but it has, we have to come to an end for this session. It's been a great couple of days being part of Tech Week, running the Reimagine the Digital Economy series along with the Singapore FinTech Festival. I just wanted to say thank you to the audience, of course, and thank you to our speakers, Sapindu Mahanti, Chief FinTech Officer for MAS out of Singapore, Anand Ranchor, the Head of Innovation for Kiwibank, and our panelists, Dheeraj Chaudhary dialing in from Singapore, and James Brown, GM for FinTech New Zealand, Dave Rouse, CEO for Carbon Click, and of course, Liana from Finapsta. So some great discussions. Really enjoyed it. I did want to just highlight as I close off that don't forget to, on the 3rd of August, the biggest event of the year globally with anything to do with financial services and fintech, and obviously focused on tech for good, very, very important in these times. Singapore FinTech Festival is going to be making a major announcement on the global launch. And of course, we've got the man who's responsible for this with us, Supnindu. But we are going to learn a lot more about fresh format, finding new ways to take innovation to the world. And so please, if you are able to dial in, it's at 3 p.m. Singapore time, and it's on the 3rd of August. So thank you very much, and stay well, and hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yes, team.
Thanks, everyone.